Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Friday the 22nd of April. I'm Andrew Wilson and this is Scotland at 7. First this evening I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 58 of the illegal Russian invasion. Then I'll introduce this evening's guest. Then we'll take a look together at the headlines from Scotland and around the world. And then we'll watch the First Minister speak at the launch this morning of the SNP's Manifesto for the imminent local elections. And our guest for this evening, we can have a chat about that manifesto launch as well, and what the First Minister was saying. But with regard to Ukraine, the Russian military official Rustem Minakayev says that Russia plans to take full control of Donbass and southern Ukraine as part of the second phase of its military operation. Control over the south of Ukraine is another way to Transnistria, where there is also evidence that Russian-speaking population is being oppressed, he said at a meeting in Russia's central Sverdlovsk region, referring to a breakaway pro-Russian region in Moldova. Russia has been hiding evidence of its barbaric war crimes in Mariupol by burying the bodies of civilians killed by shelling in a new mass grave, the city's mayor has said, as US satellite imagery company has released photos that appear to match the site. The graves could hold as many as 9,000 dead, the Mariupol City Council said on Thursday in a post on the Telegram messaging app. The mayor of Mariupol has issued a new appeal for the full evacuation of the southern Ukrainian city that Russia claims has fallen into its hands, apart from the Azovstal steelworks, which the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, has ordered to be blockaded. Putin's decision to blockade the Azovstal steel plant probably indicates a desire to contain Ukrainian resistance in the city and free up Russian forces to be deployed in eastern Ukraine, British intelligence suggests. US officials have dismissed Putin's claim that his forces have liberated Mariupol as disinformation. There will be no humanitarian corridors open today in Ukraine, the Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk announced, due to the danger on those routes. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of planning to falsify an independence referendum in the partly occupied southern regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia. The physical damage to Ukraine's infrastructure has reached $60 billion and will rise further as the war continues, the World Bank President David Malpass has said. Ukraine needs $7 billion each month to keep its economy afloat amid the economic losses inflicted by Russia, President Zelensky has said. NATO must avoid a direct military confrontation with Russia that could lead to a third world war, said the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Germany will supply Ukraine with heavy weaponry very quickly through a three-way exchange with Ukraine and some of Germany's NATO partners, according to the country's Europe Minister, Anna Luhrmann. Ukrainian soldiers, meanwhile, are training in the UK, learning how to use 120 British armoured vehicles before returning with them to fight. Plans for Pope Francis to meet in Jerusalem in June with the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, who has backed Russia's war in Ukraine, have been suspended by the Vatican. Counter-terrorism police from the UK, gathering evidence of potential war crimes in Ukraine, say that they have been struck by the incredibly harrowing material and witness accounts from the front line of the conflict. And Russia has slapped indefinite travel bans on the US Vice President Kamala Harris and the Meta chief executive Mark Zuckerberg, as well as dozens of prominent Americans and Canadians in retaliation for recent sanctions. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined this evening by Ronnie Cowan MP. Ronnie has been the SNP MP for Inverclyde since 2015. He's lucky enough to have grown up and lived in Greenock and is now the MP for the town and the surrounding area. Ronnie, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing very well. It's very sunny Greenock this afternoon. It's very sunny Inverclyde. It's been a lovely day out and about, as you mentioned earlier on, with the First Minister coming here to launch our Council Manifesto, and then catching up all my challenging casework, which I'm sure is going to creep up during our conversation this evening.
It certainly will, Ronnie, but we're very good. But in any event, we're very grateful to you for joining us, and we will be talking about the launch of the SNP's local council election manifesto in a little while this evening. But first, the Home Secretary has been accused of misleading Parliament after a High Court ruling revealed that unpublished parts of a controversial policy to push back migrant dinghies in the Channel said that the tactic would not be used against asylum seekers. The pushbacks policy was finalised in autumn 2021, yet in January this year, Priti Patel said pushing back migrant boats was absolutely still policy, when she gave evidence to the Lord's Justice and Home Affairs Committee. She has been accused of giving that evidence, even though she knew about the unpublished clauses in the policy not to use pushbacks against asylum seekers. The Shadow Attorney General, Shami Chakrabarti, accused Patel of misleading Parliament and called on her to apologise. This judgment reveals the Home Secretary connived to mislead refugees, voters and Parliament that people expressly seeking asylum could be repelled in UK waters. Priti Patel must apologise, she continued, and rethink large sections of her Borders Bill before it returns to the Lords. It is a disgraceful breach of the rule of law. Details of the unpublished policy came to light during a legal challenge to the pushbacks plan brought by the Public and Commercial Services Union and the NGOs Care for Calais, Channel Rescue and Freedom from Torture. The Home Office had applied to the High Court for public interest immunity to avoid making the details of the pushbacks policy public. This mechanism is used where sensitive issues such as organised crime, terrorism or national security are involved. But judges said that disclosure of the policy did not give rise to a real risk of serious harm to the public interest. A key part of the unpublished policy, disclosed in the High Court judgment, is that anyone in a dinghy who indicates that they wish to claim asylum in the UK should not be pushed back, but instead escorted ashore. Almost everyone who uses this method to reach the UK is an asylum seeker, according to the Home Office's own data. So, Ronnie, these are allegations of another minister misleading in this case, the House of Lords. Obviously, allegations of another minister misleading the House of Commons were the subject of considerable debate and discussion and attention yesterday. And I think you were present in the House of Commons yesterday. So, thinking first of the allegations against the Prime Minister that he misled the House of Commons, what was your overall impression of the events that you saw and heard unfolding yesterday in the House?
Well, obviously it's been unfolding for some time now, but to be most up to date, on Tuesday there was a statement on this where we thought the Prime Minister was going to come before the House of Commons and apologise, having been fined for breaking his own law by the Metropolitan Police. And instead, what we got was a 2 minutes of okay, fine, pretty much, I'm sorry, I got caught and I wouldn't do it again, followed by the atrocities in Ukraine. And what they've done is they continue to try and wrap their stories up in other stories as if, look, this is a very minor thing. There was a party, there was cake, but the real issues the world faces today are this. Now, I get that. I get the scale of the death and destruction in Ukraine, how horrendous it absolutely is. But we have to have governments we can trust in because they're involved in our foreign policy in places like Ukraine and Russia. And if they're not telling us what they can tell us and they're not behaving in a lawful manner, then we have to understand that. And they have to be honest enough to say, I made a horrendous mistake, I got it absolutely wrong, and I genuinely show contrition. But that's not what we're seeing here. And it's not just Boris Johnson, because when he behaves in that way, it signals to the people around him this is how his cabinet can behave. And if the cabinet behave that way, that signals to junior ministers, to other spokespersons, to the backbenches, and to their party in general. This is okay for us to do this. Because you know what, guys? We can get away with it sometimes. So these are things they've been caught doing. What are we not catching them do? And Priti Patel's admission, or her getting caught out again, is just the latest, where there's this psyche within the party, within the Conservative and Unionist Party, that they can get away with doing things and that's okay. Other people will be held to different standards. So that was rolling out over Tuesday, Wednesday, and then into Thursday yesterday, where we're told that Priti Patel has also been economical with the truth and what she's been revealing to Parliament. And I think that makes the electorate turn off politics. We all get tarred with the same brush. I'll be accused of the same thing. People, all you politicians lie. You're all there with your nose in the trough. I hear this stuff all the time. and it irritates me immensely. But I can understand why people who are not totally immersed in politics see these sound bites, see these big stories like, oh yeah, another politician at it again. And the heads of our governments should not be allowed to behave in such a manner. And Boris Johnson should have gone a long time ago. The good thing which I'm seeing, because I do the great privilege of seeing it up close and personal, something that's very ugly, but I watched it over the course of the week, and we saw it yesterday, when somebody like William Ragg, who's a Brexiteer, who supported Boris Johnson, a very intelligent, articulate guy, not to the manner born, but a senior member now in the Conservative Party, can stand up in the House of Commons and say, obviously with a heavy heart, but in a very considered manner, that he can no longer support the Prime Minister. Then there's just that change again. You think, can he now survive this? But having said that, he should have gone a long time ago, and he is one of the great survivors. How he ever got to be Prime Minister in the first place is a mystery to me. But there he is. So how long will he survive this time? I believe as long as the Conservatives are prepared to hold him there as a human shield. And then once the dust settles, they'll turf him out and bring in the next contender.
That's a good point and very useful analysis. Thanks, Ronnie. Turning now to the Home Secretary in particular and these latest allegations against her, you mentioned signalling there a moment ago on how what the Prime Minister has been saying in his behaviour signals to junior ministers and to officials and to spokesperson and to backbench MPs. So thinking now about Ms Patel, whilst many folks will find a lot of what she says to be absolutely abhorrent, and even a former Home Secretary and Prime Minister Theresa May this week criticised the current Home Secretary because her anti-asylum seeker and anti-refugee policies simply won't work. If what Theresa May says is true, then is pretty much everything that Priti Patel says is just so much hot air aimed at signalling to the readers of the Mail and the Express, particularly in the narrow Tory majority seats in the southeast of England, is all that she's doing the opposite of virtue signalling. And there's actually very little hard policy in here. All she's doing is creating a great deal of froth for the press.
It's absolutely playing to a section of the electorate, and a section of the electorate which I'm not familiar with. What actually has happened here is that she's said that we can do pushbacks, we can turn people away in rubber dinghies who are trying to cross the channel on the biggest shipping lanes in the world, and people in rubber dinghies, and we can turn them back. Now, we know that's no longer true, but what sort of person lies about that? That I can do this? If somebody accused you of doing that, you'd run a mile from it saying, that's the last thing we're going to do. As it turns out, they can't do that, but they're actually boasting they can. That's a strange mixed up psyche, in my view. But that's the people they want to be. They do this hard-on criminals thing as well, and they're doing this hard-on immigration. And we all know Priti Patel herself, from an Indian-Ugandan family, was welcomed into this country as a young girl who was given every opportunity to build a life here, has built herself a political career, along with many other people who are in that same situation. And yet, I think it's particularly sickening to see somebody in that situation pull up the ladder behind them and turn their back on people who are looking for refuge now. I've got no experience of this. I've never been a refugee. But you really have hoped that somebody who themselves and their family had come from that sort of background would have a greater empathy with it, a greater understanding, would be pushing the limits out for me to find it hard to understand. But she's not. She's the opposite of that. And she's turning her back on those people, not just this example in the Channel Islands, but in general, making immigration a really hard thing. When you really think that her and her position and her background would have the knowledge and the understanding, as I said, the empathy to make it easier for people to come to this country. And in Scotland, we're welcoming immigration, and we feel that people have always brought a lot to our country. I grew up, as you said earlier, in Greenock. When I was a kid growing up, we had a large Italian community and a Polish community, and we're now bringing in Syrian families, Afghan families, Ukrainian families are arriving as I speak. And these are people who will be welcomed into our society, respected for where they've come from, and also what they can contribute to our society. Priti Patel doesn't seem to get any of that at all.
Thanks, Ronnie. No, you're absolutely right. And I'll spare you any more conversations about the current Home Secretary this evening for the rest of the programme, I promise.
Thank you,
We'll
I appreciate that.
we'll move to our next story now, which is that the UK economy is showing growing signs of stress from the soaring cost of living amid a sharp fall in retail sales and the biggest loss of momentum for service sector activity since Omicron hit businesses at the end of last year. Figures show that a bigger than expected decline in March retail sales was followed by a slowdown across the economy in April, with record inflationary pressures hitting businesses. The Office for National Statistics said retail sales volumes in the UK dropped by 1.4% in March, after a decline of 0.5% in the earlier month, as shoppers adjusted to rising costs. City economists had forecast the drop of 0.3%. The drop in demand came before shoppers felt the impact of April's cost of living rises, when the cap on household energy bills went up by 54% and national insurance contributions increased by 1.25 percentage points. Separate figures from S&P Global and the Chartered Institute for Procurement and Supply showed growth in the UK private sector had recorded the slowest rate for 3 months, as high inflation and the war in Ukraine also hit demand. Warning that escalating costs were offsetting a boost to spending from the end of COVID restrictions, the survey found that escalating energy, fuel and raw material costs contributed to across-the-board rises in average prices charged by firms. Following the release of the figures, the pound fell 1.3% to its weakest level since late 2020, that's just below $1.29. According to the ONS data, spending on food fell for the 5th consecutive month, as supermarkets reported a sharp drop in sales, alongside declines for butchers and bakers, as well as an 11.3% fall in spending on alcohol and tobacco. Fears for a marked slowdown in consumer spending have intensified in recent weeks, with surveys showing the public has grown gloomier about the economy than when banks were on the brink of collapse during the 2008 financial crisis. Figures from the ONS show 87% of adults reported a rise in living costs in late March, compared with 62% in November. Against a backdrop of soaring global energy prices and rising costs of a weekly shop, inflation reached 7% in March, the highest level since 1992, and is forecast to rise further this month after a record increase in household gas and electricity prices. The Bank of England has warned the measure for this rising cost of living could hit 10% later this year, the highest level since the early 1980s. So, Ronnie, thinking about these figures in particular to do with retail spending and spending on the weekly shop, are you hearing any feedback or any commentary from owners of small businesses and other retailers in Inverclyde who are seeing the rise in increases in their costs and reduction in consumer spending?
On an ongoing and on a constant basis, and it's very sad to see people who pre-COVID were already struggling to keep businesses going on the high street in particular. And then COVID hits, and yes, there was a lots of government support there to see them through it, but the reality is now back to where we were, and the people are just struggling to keep their businesses going for a number of reasons. Their costs in maintaining their businesses are increasing, and footfall or expenditure with them is dropping because the local economy is really struggling. You can't just generate money like this, magically. It will be a long, slow, hopeful recovery from COVID, but you can't just wipe it away in a couple of months and think we're back to where we were. And as I said, back to where we were, people were still struggling. So we're in a situation now whereby, although we've been told that we're recovering quicker than any other country, we always seem to be leading things when the UK government put out their figures. The reality of it is that people within my community are struggling. A phrase been used to death to either heat or eat. But it's true. And I'm very fortunate. I'm a good job and I'm well paid, but I'm close enough to my community to see that people are really at their wits' end, and it's not one of those things where maybe a major event happens in your life which just makes it that unbearable. It's a camel in the straw. It's one thing laid upon another which has been done to people living in deprived areas for over a period of time. And one by one, they've been made poorer, they're becoming more disenfranchised, becoming ostracised in many cases from society. And then you come along with something like an increase in energy costs, and they've got nowhere to turn. They've done all the sort of cash-saving tricks I think you can possibly do to spread your income as far as you can possibly go. They've done all that. And where do you get to when you get to the end of your tether? And that's what people are faced with now. So to ask those people to somehow stimulate the high street and get out there and spend their way out of trouble, which is pretty much what the UK government is saying at the end of COVID, you'll get back out there and you've saved all this money because you've not been out for 2 years. And well, that's just not the case, not just in Inverclyde, but in the most deprived areas throughout the United Kingdom. People are at I hate to use this cliff edge here, but they've been pushed and pushed and pushed, and they've now got nowhere to turn. And they're not getting sufficient help from a UK government, which is in a situation to ease that level of poverty, because we saw them do it through the likes of the furlough scheme during the COVID when they had to. But at this moment in time, I'm afraid, with the increase in taxation, increase in national insurance, they're trying to stimulate spending, but they don't. I genuinely don't think the people in charge of the Exchequer understand money. Now that may seem a strange thing to say, but Rishi Sunak comes from an incredibly wealthy situation right now. And if you've got so much money at your fingertips, do you really understand? Has anybody in the Treasury ever been in a situation where they've had to go through to a supermarket shop and think, can I afford this? I'm going to check out, do I have to put something back in the shelf? And I can guarantee you they haven't. Now, if they've never been in that situation, they don't truly value or understand money. It's a thing, it's a commodity they play with to make more money. But do they understand the day-to-day lives that people have to exist? And I don't think they do. I think that's unhealthy. It's like oxygen to me. They treat money like oxygen. I take it completely for granted. It's there when I get up in the morning. I use it all day long. It's there when I go to bed at night. The moment I'll appreciate it is when I stop having oxygen. Then suddenly I'll have to understand it better. They don't understand money. It's something which happens to other people. And at the very ages of our society, there are a lot of people who are struggling to go through day to day, which isn't good for their physical health, isn't good for their mental health, isn't good for our societies. And we're seeing the knock-on of that through an increase in mental health cases, which have been reported as well. And these people have been pushed and pushed and pushed, and you do just wonder where this is going to take us to.
Thanks, Ronnie. We'll certainly pay close attention to the ongoing effects of the Tory cost of living crisis and its effect upon people in Scotland over the next few weeks and months as matters develop. But we'll move to our next story now, which is that legislation to improve fire safety and boost Scotland's net zero ambitions has been laid before the Scottish Parliament today. Under the legislation, developers will be banned from using combustible cladding on high-rise buildings. Since 2005, new cladding systems in high-rise blocks of flats have either had to use non-combustible materials or pass a large-scale fire test. The building standards legislation removes the option of a fire test, completely prohibiting such materials from use on domestic and other high-risk buildings, such as care homes and hospitals, above 11 metres. The highest risk metal composite cladding material will be banned from any new building of any height, with replacement cladding also required to meet the new standards. It also includes improvements to energy performance standards aimed to make buildings easier to heat while ensuring they are well ventilated and comfortable to live in. Changes to requirements on fire safety for cladding systems will be introduced on the 1st of June this year, while improvements to energy and environmental standards will apply from the 1st of October this year. The combustible cladding ban will apply to all buildings with a story 11 metres or more above the ground, and which contain a dwelling, a building place used as a place of assembly, or as a place of entertainment or recreation, a hospital, or a residential care building or sheltered housing complex, or shared multi-occupancy residential building. So, Ronnie, it occurred to me that the Grenfell disaster in London was almost 5 years ago. Has it perhaps taken a little long to properly change the law and fundamentally change the law in Scotland almost 5 years after the events at Grenfell?
Yeah, 2017, 72 people died in the Grenfell Tower. And you're right, nearly 5 years down the line here, and you think things should have happened a lot quicker than this. It is, and I'm not making excuses for anybody here, it's a very complicated issue because no one building is built exactly the same. So the situation was that buildings, first and foremost, had to be assessed. Do you live in a high rise? They're now over 11 metres, but initially we didn't know what height we're looking at and what sort of construction we're looking at. So where do we go to? Where do we start to identify buildings where people are potentially in risk? So what we've got now is a legislation coming forward that says, okay, going forward, this is what we've got to do, and retrospectively, this is what we've got to do. But 5 years to get to the stage, bearing in mind that a lot of people are living in these buildings day in, day out, is in my book, too long to get here, though I understand the difference involved in it. There's also a situation where we've got to pay for the experts. I can't just rock up the building and say, I don't like the look of that cladding, we should do something about it. There are experts, and a limited number of experts, who can actually analyse the situation and come up with the correct path we've got to take. If we jump at it too quickly, maybe we just replace bad with bad. Maybe we go for the cheapest option. It's not the best option. I think we've tried that in the past, and certainly the UK government has. So it's right that these things are considered and thought out, but given that people's health and safety, and as we now know, their lives are potentially at risk, then you'd like to think the governments, the four governments of the United Kingdom, could get together, put their heads together, and have moved on this quicker. But one of the issues we see, and I've got a letter in front of me which I got from Michael Gove the 19th of April, so 3 days ago now, on this very subject, and it is filled with things that says England only, England, Wales only, UK wide, England, Wales and Scotland. But the Scottish Government, the Welsh Government, Northern Ireland Assembly were not involved in this discussion. They haven't engaged with the industry and those other countries, and they've come up with this plan here now. And you just wonder, why did they not all sit down and recognise this as a UK-wide problem 5 years ago and come up with a UK-wide solution? Because yes, a lot of the talk will be around the money involved in this, because ultimately, that's what it comes down to. There's budgets and budgets to be spent, but people are still living in high-rise blocks, sleeping there tonight, maybe with their families, unsure as to what their buildings are actually clad in, and that simply should not be the situation.
Absolutely, thanks, Ronnie. And it crosses my mind when just listening to you speak there. Of course, building regulations, building standards are currently reserved to Holyrood, and building standards and building control has been very distinct in Scotland since building control was invented. And certainly building standards have been different between other parts of the United Kingdom and Scotland for a very, very long time, certainly more than 100 years. You mentioned Michael Gove there, and we know, of course, that the Internal Markets Act is intended to seek to regulate other parts of the UK apart from England, and in order to bring them into line. So do you think that there is a risk here that, for example, building control is going to come into Michael Gove's crosshairs? It's going to become a target for him, and he's going to seek to reduce. There's a risk in terms of the Internal Markets Bill that the current Tory government will begin to reduce Scottish building standards and the quality of construction in Scotland in order to bring them down to the standards that currently apply in England.
I would hate to think that this was going to be used as some sort of Trojan horse that says, if you're going to get funding, because they've changed the structure of funding now, so the initial money came through the Barnett consequential. If they do raise the funding through the building safety levy, we wouldn't get anything through the Barnett consequential. And I would hate to think that this is going to be used as some sort of Trojan horse, as you say, to bring Scottish standards under one UK type standard, which meant we could then raise the same levy and get some sort of consequential on it. As you say, Scottish building standard, and in my opinion, I'm no expert, but I've always been given the impression that we do lots of things in Scotland rather better than they're done in the United Kingdom. And we've got a very distinct industry, and I would like to think we could do everything to protect that. Always learning from other people. I think we're quite good at that. So if they come up with some fantastic new system down in England, then we can look at that and say, yeah, it's great, we'll adopt that in Scotland, of course that. But I like to think that our industry should be distinctly Scottish, as in, as you say, we've got a long history and a proud history of what we can build here in Scotland, and we do tend to have, and I'm not disparaging of anybody, but we do tend to have a higher standard.
That's what I was thinking, Ronnie. Thank you for your thoughts on that. We'll move on to our next story now, which is that PFI schemes, introduced when Labour and the Liberal Democrats were in power in Scotland, are still costing Scotland £30 billion, with councils across the country spending huge chunks of their education budget every year paying off extortionate contracts agreed by the previous administrations. According to reports, last year councils across Scotland spent £461 million on PFI unitary charges. That's an average of 9% of all council education budgets. In Inverclyde, where Labour is launching its local election manifesto, the council there spent the largest chunk of its education budget on PFI contracts, with 25% of its education budget being spent on the upkeep of the contracts. Commenting, the SNP MSP for Greenock and Inverclyde, Stuart McMillan, said, "Across Scotland, councils are still paying the cost of a Labour government 15 years after they were last in office, a shocking indictment of the decisions made by Labour ministers that is still landing local authorities with bills worth millions. That is money that could be spent on ensuring our schools, hospitals and other services recover from the pandemic," he continued. So, Ronnie, we've had a comment there from your colleague, the MSP for Greenock and Inverclyde. From your perspective as the MP for Inverclyde, what do you think that Inverclyde Council could do with 25% of its education budget, which at the moment is being spent on debts that are incurred as a result of these PFI schemes?
Gosh, what a long list I've got of things that we could spend that money on here at Inverclyde. But the interesting thing is, as you say, as we're running up towards our May election, is that our current Labour Conservative coalition that runs our Inverclyde Council are very, very quick to say how proud they are of our local school estate. And they're right to, because we've got a very good school estate here throughout Inverclyde. We have refurbished and we've built brand new schools over a period of time, and we've got a very good estate. But the legacy of that is, as you said, 25% of our education budget is wrapped up in that now. They never mention that. They failed to mention that. And the 9%, I think, which is the council average, this is something like £30 billion over 10 years. So £30 billion, we've just finished talking about how do we reclad buildings, how do we improve building standards. That's a lot of money and can go a long way in Scotland. That coming down to a scale of Inverclyde, oh man, there's so much money, many things I can spend that money on, or percentage of that money here in Inverclyde. So many things we want to do in terms of reforestation and reintroducing peatland and reintroducing tree canopies and improving road structures, protecting us from flooding that we get. There's also recreational facilities for young adults, which helps them. It keeps them out of trouble. We've got issues with drug addiction and alcohol addiction and gambling, and so to give people worthwhile things to do in their lives, we can spend that money so many times, so many better places than paying back PFI, which to companies, which are, a lot of them are offshore, and we never see that money again. We don't see that money because we spend money locally in your economy. It circulates within your economy. When you're paying out a window like this to somebody out there somewhere who's got a company in the Channel Islands or Gibraltar or wherever they're coming from, you never see that money again. It just goes into their bank account. It doesn't do any good again. So yes, I love the fact that we've got a great school estate here in Inverclyde, and that will go a long way to help our young adults develop and gain an education and go into whatever they want to do in life. And we shouldn't forget that. But there are so many better ways in which we could have funded that same rebuild. And if the Labour Council are going to shout about what great work they've done in physically getting those buildings in place, they cannot ignore the fact that behind them they've left this legacy of debt which has to be paid off over such a long time. And yes, our school estate still needs money spent on it, always will do, because there's maintenance that has to be done as well. So that's going to be an ongoing issue. Now, like everybody would love to have a bottomless pit of money where we can spend it on our health or education or transport. That'd be great. We want to give that to people. We want to give them the best possible start in life. I think we all understand that. We talked to a couple of people earlier on the programme who maybe don't, but I think we all pretty much get that. But we don't have a bottomless pit of money, so we have to be very careful how we spend it. And PFI was a bad scheme from day one, and it's with the legacy which is hung around the neck of any incoming council administration has to be acknowledged that this was not their doing, unless, of course, Labour returned. But I'm hoping that confidently that we can take control of the administration here in Inverclyde with our SNP council. But from day one, they're going to be butting up against the problems created by the maladministration of the Labour Party for all these years.
That's absolutely right, Ronnie. And actually, before we move to discussing the launch today of the SNP's Manifesto for local councils, I was going to talk to you for a moment, just in light of what you were saying, in connection with local councils. As you say, in Inverclyde, the local authority is a Tory and Labour coalition. And as part of his campaigning, and of course Aberdeen City Council is also a Tory Labour coalition. In Edinburgh, Alex Cole-Hamilton has called for a Tory Lib Dem coalition. Now, you're not involved in local politics now, and you're at Westminster. However, looking from your perspective, as the Tory and Labour and Lib Dem parties shrink in membership and appear to shrink in attractiveness to the Scottish electorate, is what they're saying in terms of local politics, is that evidence that these three unionist parties are just coalescing into one bitter lump?
That's a good way of putting it. I think during the launch today, the First Minister said, better together's back together. And that's what they're doing here. They will do anything they can to keep the SNP out, because the SNP have been in government at different levels that they've shown their competence, and they don't want that to be seen to people of Scotland, because that might just make them believe that we're big enough and smart enough to run our own country. So let's just keep the SNP out of the picture and carry on doing what the unionist parties have been doing, and that seems to be their one aim from this. I've looked at what's been offered by those parties, because I genuinely, quite a lot of work we do down the road in Westminster, I can work across party. If there's things we want to work on together to make things better for the general society, I'm happy to do that. I've done that with gambling reform. I worked very closely with the Labour Party and the Conservative Unions parties. Caroline Harris of Swansea East is Labour, and Ian Duncan-Smith from the Conservative Party. And the three of us sit down on a regular basis and say, gambling-related harm, gambling reform, what can we do to make this better? And we do it. But I look at what the Scottish parties are doing, and everything is slanted on SNP being bad. Now, we've said this for years, SNP bad, SNP bad. But I genuinely look forward to the day when I see something coming from Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dem, and think, that's a really smart idea. That would benefit Scotland. That's really interesting. We should maybe have a look at that. Why have we not thought of that? But they just don't do it. Because their sole purpose is to say SNP are not good at doing things. And we do see that at a national level. But coming into council elections, we're absolutely seeing that here locally as well. I'm looking at the leaflets that are coming through my door, and I'm pretty sure I get more leaflets than most people. I'm not very sure why, but I definitely do. And you read through them, and all they're doing is talking about the SNP. The Labour leaflet, the Conservative and Unionist leaflet, is just all SNP, SNP, SNP. I'm thinking, if I'm not involved in politics, I'm now employed as an MP, but 35 years before that I worked in IT. If I get these leaflets through my door, I'm thinking, who's got a vision here? Who's got the ambition to drive this area forward and do something constructive with it? And if you just pile relentless negativity on top of negativity, then I'm not interested at all. I'm not a happy, clappy, shiny sort of guy. People know me will testify to that. But I genuinely believe that positivity will win out. And yet all I see from the Cole Hamiltons and the Douglas Rosses and the people of different political colours in this country of ours is their relentless hatred and determination to run the SNP down. And I would much rather, I think it's to everybody's benefit. I'm not going to tell them how to run a campaign, because quite frankly I'll be happy when they fall flat in their face. But I genuinely believe they would go on better with the people of Scotland if they said, here's our positive vision. Come with us on this journey. We want to get here. This is how we would do it. And they just don't do it. So I hope they're not watching this, because so far they're playing right into our hands with this council election, just telling the people of Scotland that they're rubbish.
Thanks, Ronnie. And we were going to turn now to talk about the plans and the manifesto that the First Minister launched this morning. So the SNP's leader, Nicola Sturgeon, launched the party's local election manifesto, outlining how SNP councillors will tackle the Tory cost of living crisis and how communities across Scotland must come together to combat it. Speaking at the Beacon Arts Centre in Greenock, the First Minister highlighted how the SNP Scottish Government has already supported household budgets throughout its time in office with free prescriptions, free university tuition, the fairest income tax deal in the UK, and has saved households hundreds on their council tax bill compared to England. Ms Sturgeon then went on to outline how SNP councillors will tackle the cost of living crisis and the policies that will be their priority. These include a £150 payment to ease household budgets, expanding free early learning and childcare, introducing wraparound childcare, building 110,000 affordable homes in the next decade, and developing the National Care Service. So first of all, here's our video of what the First Minister said this morning.
Good morning, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you to the fantastic Beacon Arts Centre here in Greenock for the launch of the SNP Manifesto for the local government elections in just 13 days. It's been a tough few years for us all, so it's great to be here in person with you all. The COVID pandemic has reminded us of the value of local services. We saw communities come together to help each other and to make sure we all got through as best as we could. Groups of people collecting and delivering food parcels to those most vulnerable, and a renewed sense of community spirit across the country. Councils have played a key role in Scotland's response to the pandemic and will be central to tackling the Tory cost of living crisis. At all levels of government, the SNP will never stop working to support people and families. Thanks to SNP action, average council tax bills are almost £600 lower in Scotland than in England, and we will go further. Inverclyde will take steps to heat Inverclyde homes using cheaper, greener energy, to develop a local heating plan, work with energy providers and utilising the expertise of businesses and universities. And they will also seek to create well-paid and sustainable jobs through the opportunities created to a transition to a net zero economy. Glasgow will invest council resources in tackling the cost of living crisis with a new £3 million cost of living crisis support fund targeting support to hard-pressed households. An SNP-run Glasgow Council will also continue to attract jobs and investment into the city and develop and implement a community wealth building strategy for Glasgow, ensuring that economic benefits are felt locally across local communities. North Lanarkshire will work hard to undo decades of Labour mismanagement by introducing a neighbourhood model for spending and community decisions and accelerating the area's home building programme. An SNP North Lanarkshire Council will also focus on the day-to-day basics, like reintroducing a free special uplift for householders, tackling local fly tipping, plus free swimming for all primary 5 pupils. Across Scotland, local SNP councillors will work tirelessly to help people with the Tory cost of living crisis. And to hear more about our plans, I am delighted to introduce the First Minister of Scotland and SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon.
Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you today, launching the SNP's manifesto for the local government election. And let me say, first of all, what an absolute pleasure it is to be here with all of you in person today. You know, after the past couple of years, being together physically is one of the many things in our lives that we should never, ever take for granted again. Of course, the pandemic is not yet over, not by a long shot, But things are, I hope, starting to look much brighter. And I know that we would simply never have gotten this far without the compassion, the resilience, the solidarity and determination of people and communities across our country. So from the bottom of my heart to all of the people of Scotland, I say thank you. Friends, elections to local councils across the country are always important. The quality of local services and local representation really matters. But there is no doubt whatsoever that this election is particularly crucial. The past 2 years has shown us the value of local services, and they have also encouraged a stronger sense of community and cohesion. And of course, these elections come at a time when the situation, both here at home and overseas, is acutely serious. Vladimir Putin's despicable and illegal invasion of Ukraine has sparked a humanitarian crisis that demands a response from all countries across the world, including, of course, Scotland. The Ukrainian people have been truly inspirational in the heroic defence of their homeland against his violence and aggression. We join with the democratic world in solidarity with the government and the people of Ukraine as they fight for democracy and for the independence and territorial integrity of their country. We stand with Ukraine. And for those seeking sanctuary on our shores, we have rightly opened our hearts and our homes, and we stand ready to extend a warm welcome to Scotland. Now, here at home, we are also seeing the brutal impact of a cost of living crisis, much more severe than most of us have ever known in our lifetimes. People are struggling to heat their homes, they are struggling to pay for essentials, and they are terrified to open bills. I know just how hard things are for people right now, but knowing and understanding isn't enough. People across this country want hope, but they want that hope to be grounded in a plan which offers as much practical help as possible. When I think about the last couple of years of how we all pulled together in the face of huge adversity and uncertainty, I know that by working together with the right leadership, serious leadership, we can confront the challenges we are facing today and we can build a better tomorrow. What we need over this coming period is nothing less than a pandemic-level Team Scotland response to these challenges. And that is why I am asking people across our country to back the SNP on May 5th. The immediate priority, and let me make this pledge today, the immediate priority of every SNP councillor elected at this election will be supporting families through the cost of living crisis, and not just in words, but in action. Of course, supporting household budgets has been a key priority for the SNP throughout our entire time in office. Free prescriptions, free university tuition, the fairest income tax policy anywhere in the UK, council tax bills hundreds of pounds lower on average in Scotland than in England. These were always important policies, but during these really tough times, they show their true benefit. And that is why I pledge again today that for as long as we are in office, the SNP will always protect and prioritise these policies. But our plan is not just about protecting existing cost of living policies. It's also about using all of the powers and all of the resources at our disposal to deliver as much help as we can now. The SNP has battled long and hard to win social security powers for our Scottish Parliament. Now, these powers are still far, far too limited, but I am proud that we are using them to build a system based on fairness, on dignity and on respect. The contrast with Westminster's at times despicable treatment of those who rely on the social security safety net could not be starker. We are now here in Scotland delivering 12 benefits through Social Security Scotland. 7 of these are new and unique. They simply don't exist anywhere else in the UK. And we've taken the decision this year to increase the benefits within the control of the Scottish Government by 6%, almost double the increase in UK government-controlled payments. Now, in tough times, all of this makes a difference. Take the Scottish Child Payment, which we began rolling out last year. It gives targeted support to help lift families with kids out of poverty. It's one of the most ambitious interventions in the whole history of devolution, rightly described by campaigners as a game changer in the fight against child poverty. We know that families are really struggling right now, so that's why we've just doubled the weekly payment to £20 a week. And later this year, as we roll out that payment to even more families, we will raise it again to £25 a week. That's a huge help for those who need it most. You know, the Child Poverty Action Group recently published research confirming that the combined effect of Scottish Government policies and lower childcare costs will reduce the cost of bringing up a child for lower income families in Scotland by up to 31%. That amounts to £24,000. Friends, what a powerful illustration of the positive difference voting SNP makes to people across our country. It is an investment in a fairer country. It is a down payment on a better Scotland. Friends, as well as the actions taken by the SNP government, local councils have a massive role in tackling this cost of living crisis. That's why today's manifesto, which complements at national level the ambitious manifestos published by our groups of candidates across the country, outlines the ambitious plans that SNP councillors and councils will prioritise. Last year, councils delivered pandemic payments of £130 to low-income families, and this year they're delivering help worth £150 to almost 3 out of every 4 households in Scotland. Working together, the SNP government and local councils are shielding Scots from some of the worst Tory policies, like the bedroom tax and the benefit cap. And we're providing free school meals to children across the country. All children in primaries 1 to 5 are now benefiting, and we will soon extend free school meals in primary 6 and 7. Working together, we've also delivered a truly transformational expansion of childcare. And this manifesto that I am proud to launch today commits us to going even further. SNP councillors will prioritise the expansion of free early years education to all 1- and 2-year-olds, starting with children from low-income households. And they will build a system of wraparound childcare, providing year-round before and after school care, which will be free for those on the lowest incomes. This manifesto also outlines plans to build a fairer, greener and more resilient recovery from COVID in every community across Scotland. It includes supporting local businesses and creating high-quality jobs, making progress towards our target of 110,000 more affordable homes over the next decade, and working together to deliver a national care service to transform the way care and support is delivered for people who use community health and social care. These are the SNP's priorities. They are the right priorities to help families and communities through the cost of living crisis today and, of course, to build a better tomorrow. This is the difference that voting SNP on May 5th can make. I am proud of the actions we are taking, but I am equally determined to step up our ambition even further. It is, however, a fact, a hard fact, that most of the levers and the resources needed to tackle this cost of living crisis remain in the hands of the Westminster Government. And while the SNP has a plan to help Scotland through this crisis and onwards to a better future, The UK Tory government has its head in the sand, and it is dragging Scotland back. Their support to families struggling with rising bills is woefully inadequate. But it's actually worse than that. They are making things harder for many people and families, not just across Scotland, but across the whole of the UK. They boasted about tax cuts while hiking national insurance by 10%. And as the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has made clear, it's those on the lowest incomes who will suffer the most because of the Chancellor's decisions. And of course, this cost of living crisis didn't just begin in the past few months. It has been years in the making, the result of catastrophic Westminster policy decisions. From the very moment they took power, the Tories have been methodically chipping away at living standards and family incomes. Years of benefit freezes and a cut of £20 a week in universal credit, a 5-week wait for universal credit, and cruel sanctions that are literally taking away money people need to eat. The bedroom tax, the benefit cap, the 2-child limit, and the abhorrent rape clause, scrapping the triple lock on pensions and threatening to raise the pension age. They rammed through the hardest possible Brexit at the worst possible moment against the will of the people of Scotland, crippling trade and hurting household incomes in the process. And despite the abundance of clean energy resources at our disposal, they banned subsidies for wind power while obsessing over expensive nuclear power and dangerous technology like fracking. Thanks to years of Westminster policy failings, the fact is people in the UK are facing now the biggest drop in living standards since the 1950s. That is the consequence of Westminster control over Scotland. Friends, these deeply damaging decisions of the Tory government were not necessary. They were ideological, they were deliberate, they were harmful. And that is the difference between the SNP government and this Tory government. The SNP is investing in individuals and communities. The Tories are ripping support away. The SNP is delivering a strong social security net. The Tories have created an entire system based on social insecurity. So in this election, let us, all of us, use our votes carefully. First and foremost, I am asking people across Scotland to vote for the positive difference that the SNP has made and will continue to make. But I'm asking you also to send the strongest possible message to this corrupt, out-of-touch Tory government. You know, back in the independence campaign in 2014, the SNP raised the prospect of Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister one day. Leading opponents of independence in that campaign laughed at that. I well remember the director of the No campaign saying that Boris Johnson was a clown. He wasn't wrong there. And that the idea of him ever entering number 10 Downing Street was just scaremongering. As we now know to our cost, it was never that, and the prospect was never funny. Repeatedly breaking the rules at the height of a lockdown and then misleading Parliament about it is not funny. Imposing a hard, damaging Brexit on Scotland is not funny. Cutting universal credit amidst a cost of living crisis is not funny. The Rwandan asylum seeker scheme is not funny. It is disgraceful and utterly abhorrent. All of that. All of that, and much, much more, though, is the reality of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. But this isn't just about one man, however unfit for office he is, and he is unfit for office. It is much more fundamentally about a Westminster system that is broken, a Westminster system that time and again imposes on Scotland governments we don't vote for, and then pursues damaging policies that we do not support. Boris Johnson may or may not be forced out of office, though I strongly suspect that it is now a matter of when, not if, that scenario comes to pass. But when he goes, those Tory policies and all of the MPs and the world view that drive them will remain. Policies that hit Scotland's economy hard, policies that heap misery on the poorest and the most vulnerable in our society. So as we in Scotland contemplate this election and consider our future, there is a fundamental question we need to ask and answer. Why should we continue to pay the price and suffer the damage of Tory governments we do not elect? When I look at the world today, there is so much that I know Scotland can offer. We have the natural resources and the human talent to play a leading role in solving the global challenges of the 21st century. We need to decide if we want to continue to live in a Westminster system where scandal, sleaze, contempt for Parliament, contempt for democracy and the institutions it depends on is fast becoming the norm, where people seeking sanctuary on our shores, who are so often fleeing persecution and torture, are treated like bargaining chips to appease the Tory right-wing base? Or do we choose instead to become a normal, independent country, a country that always gets the governments its people vote for, governments that will then deploy all of our vast resources to tackle inequality and fuel poverty and build a fairer society? A country, albeit a relatively small one, that can nevertheless be a beacon for democracy, for human rights and climate justice, and be a positive voice on the global stage. Friends, the SNP will always stand up for Scotland. It is what we do, it is who we are. Today we do live in the most serious of times. And in these serious times, people, families and communities across our country need and they expect serious leadership, and that is what the SNP offers. In the months and the years ahead, let us, all of us, come together in a national pandemic-level effort to steer Scotland through this cost of living crisis and build a better future. SNP councillors, in partnership with our government at Holyrood, will strain every sinew to help families and communities through to that better future. And we will demand that the Tory government at Westminster takes responsibility and action on the crisis that it has done so much to create and so little to address. This is the clear choice facing the people of Scotland on May 5th. It is a choice between SNP action, compassion and leadership, or Tory inaction, self-interest, complacency and sleaze. To people across Scotland, please do not sit this election out. Do not let others decide your future for you. Let's tell the Tories exactly what we think of their antics and their inaction. And most importantly of all, let us vote with hope and optimism for a better future. Please use your vote at this election to elect a strong team of SNP councillors in your area. Vote for the party with a plan to help you through the tough times of today, and a plan to build a better tomorrow. Vote SNP on May 5th. Thank you very much.
And that was our video of the First Minister speaking at the Beacon Arts Centre in Greenock at the launch of the SNP's Local Elections Manifesto this morning. So, Ronnie, you were present, I believe, at the launch this morning, along with the First Minister in your constituency. So, speaking generally, first of all, how was the First Minister received at the launch in your manner, in your constituency this morning?
In my manner, well, first of all, the Beacon Arts Centre is an absolutely magnificent venue for anybody who wants to have such events. It's beautifully situated on the waterfront, stunning views. This morning the sun was shining and everybody was in a buoyant mood. And to add to that, the First Minister came along and did her thing, and she did it impeccably, as she always does. Always amazes me. Her workload must be absolutely staggering, and yet she was absolutely on point, said all the right things, and also what you don't see behind the scenes is had so much time to give to all the people who turned up to listen to her, not just at the Beacon Arts Centre, but we did a thing on the Esplanade locally afterwards, and she had so much time to talk to families and people just walking by and going, oh, it's the First Minister, literally stopping and jumping out of their cars, running over a selfie and then driving away again. And the fact that she's that sort of person who can give herself so openly to people like that is the sort of person I want to be leading my political party. So yes, the launch went very well. It was well received. You get tough questions, or she received tough questions, and quite rightly so. But there was nothing there which was going to knock her off her stride. It's a well thought out strategy we're looking at here. We believe. I think that's very important. Is that you actually believe in the policies and the pledges that you're making in the manifesto. Not everything's achievable, but you've got to set the bar high and go after it. And the SNP's nationwide manifesto, along with our own local Inverclyde SNP group, have got our own manifesto, which we published a couple of weeks ago now, maybe longer. And they're thought out to say, how do we get into our communities? How do we work with our communities? How do we empower our communities? How do we help them improve themselves? And what do we have to be there in the background to nurse the whole process along?
Thanks, Ronnie. We'll look now at a little bit more detail at two or three aspects of the manifesto that was launched this morning, in order just to get a little bit more flavour on how you feel that these elements of the manifesto, the key pledges, how they will affect people's lives and how they may play on the doorsteps and at the ballot box on the 5th of May. So, firstly, one of the pledges is to build a wraparound childcare system, providing care before and after school all year round, where those on the lowest incomes will pay nothing. Now, it struck me that in terms of the Scottish Government's response to the cost of living crisis and to levels of child poverty, which have been increasing whilst we've had a Tory government in Westminster, that one of the levers that's been used by the Scottish Government is the education system and the childcare system in terms of providing care and heating and food for children, especially those who are in the greatest difficulty in households which have the lowest incomes. So in terms of now building a wraparound childcare system, do you think we're going to see more depth and more breadth in terms of the way in which the state and local authorities are protecting and providing for those who are least able to protect themselves, in particular at a time of a cost of living crisis?
I think what you're seeing there is an SNP government using the powers it's got in the way which it can. If we were a totally independent country, we'd have much more power, much more control, we'd have more levers and more access to the powers that we require to help people through those difficult times in their lives. What we're doing is very astutely using what we have got to the very best of our abilities. But I think that to me, it says that's our intent. That's what we can do with what we've got. We could do so much more if we had complete control over all our tax-raising powers, all our spending powers, and build the country that we believe Scotland could be. But I'm heartened to see that in these times we are still pretty heavily focused on the people who need our help most. And if we lift up the poverty base, if you like, and we lift it a little bit higher, and then you do it a little bit higher and a little bit higher, then you start to eat into the deprivation that we've got, and we also give people a better start in life. And we talked about the childcare and the preschool. That's really what we're trying to do here. Is we're trying to go right down to the very grassroots of this, start with very young people, and give them as secure a base from which they can grow later on in life. I obviously have the belief that in independent Scotland we can spread that out throughout our society, but because of the limitations that we currently have on us, our focus has been very much on the young and on education and on preschool education as well.
Thanks, Ronnie. The second thing I was going to ask you about in terms of the key pledges was the key pledge to make significant progress towards the government's target of 110,000 more affordable homes by 2032, and at 70% of them being available for social rent. Now, there is an election underway at the moment, and so a great many more people than usual are on the streets, and certainly for folks who are campaigning, housing becomes a much more, the housing and the housing of other people becomes is much more in their faces at a time when people are knocking doors, running up and down tenement stairs, and are out in each ward and in each constituency can see both the range in housing, but also the problems that housing has. And of course, we were speaking earlier about the PFI, the long tail of PFI financial exposure which Scotland's local councils have as a result of the policies of previous Labour and Liberal Democrat administrations in Scotland. To me at least, it strikes me that the housing situation in Scotland is also as a result of a long tail of problems arising both from Mrs Thatcher's determination to sell every public asset that she could sell, including people's houses, and then the failure of subsequent administrations in Scotland under Labour and Liberal Democrats to build almost any social rent or local authority housing for several years. So, in terms of making progress towards more affordable homes, will that play well in Inverclyde, and is it something that will make a difference to the SNP's local authority campaigns across the wider country?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right in saying that. And look, I've been the MP here for 7 years now, and I've very much engaged with my community. But to physically get round and knock on doors, stuff like that takes a long time. And I use campaigns for just that purpose. And I've been out leafleting on behalf of my council candidates through every ward in Inverclyde over the last 4 or 5, probably longer weeks now. And I have been struck quite often by the poor levels of housing that we still have in areas in Inverclyde. Historically, I could tell the areas I knew when I was a kid growing up, which were areas you thought, well, that's not great. And most of them actually are good now. I've wandered through areas where I've been thinking, this is an area where, to be absolutely honest with you, as a child grew up in Inverclyde, angels feared to tread. This was an impoverished area with high levels of crime, and I'm looking at it now going, this is good. These are nice houses and these are well-kept streets, but there's still areas that are Inverclyde where you go into and you think, this just isn't good enough. Would I want to live here? Would I want my family to live here? And that's the marker I use. Would I be happy if after a long day I was going back here and thinking, this is my close entrance, this is my backyard, this is what I've got to walk through to get to my door, and if it's not good enough for me, then it shouldn't be good enough for any of my constituents. It's as simple as that. So there's certainly a job to be done. But yes, the manifesto recognises that and is talking about £3.5 billion, I think, is the expenditure over the course of the Parliament, and that's going to employ maybe 14,000 people to do it. But I have to say, I have visited some of the social housing in Inverclyde recently, up at the top end of Port Glasgow through local Riverside homes or social housing locally, and they're building some really good stuff now, and they're also building them in the right way. I think there was a period where maybe they threw up houses and those houses' lifespan was very short. I think we're building better social housing now, certainly in Inverclyde, than we've done in a long time. We're using solar panels. We're looking at the heat pumps and all sorts of different ways of doing it smarter. And speaking to people who recently have just moved into those houses who had been in other areas, they were saying to me that how much happier they are, because that's part of it, is people having a strong mental health as well. I was speaking to one lady who just moved into her flat, and I just not. I was looking into her flat, and I thought, this flat in Westminster would cost you £1 million to buy. It's as simple as that. In Port Glasgow, it's not going to cost you that. But it was £1 million flat. And this woman was delighted with it, absolutely delighted with it. She said that. I was speaking to my son on the phone this morning. He said, "You sound really happy, Mum." And that to me, that gave me a real big kick that we can still do that for people. You can take people and make them maybe subconsciously become happier because their environment has just been made better for them. And yes, there are pockets of housing within Inverclyde where we desperately have to continue and push through and clear them all out and build better accommodation for people. And it's great to see that the Scottish Government has backed this and will try and do this throughout Scotland with this big investment and has given them a timescale. Your time work often expands to fill the time allowed to do it. So you have to set yourself ambitious targets. If you don't make them, you don't make them. There'll be reasons why you can't. We must start off being ambitious and saying, during the term of this Parliament, we will do this. In the next 10 years, we will do this. And I see a lot of that from the Scottish Government that says, we will put the funding in here. It won't happen overnight, but we know where we're trying to get to. And given a little bit of patience, a little bit of effort, and a little bit of understanding, maybe, then we will get to where we want to get to. And the intention is always to improve the life of the people of Scotland.
That's great, Ronnie. Thank you. The new flat in that you were looking at in Inverclyde sounds fantastic. And from my own perspective, long may it continue that people are getting the opportunity to live in homes like that in Scotland. And now, the final aspect of the manifesto launch I would like to touch on with you is the last key pledge, which was to support the Scottish Government's plan to give the people of Scotland the opportunity to choose the country's future in an independence referendum in the first half of this parliamentary term. And to be clear, that's the Scottish Parliament. There have been, across the media and across elements of the Yes movement, obviously the plans and the planning for the next referendum on independence are matters of fevered debate and discussion and disagreement from time to time. In terms of the First Minister's speech this morning and this manifesto, do you feel that the way in which the Scottish Government is both explaining and is progressing its approach to making arrangements for an imminent now independence referendum, do you think that messaging is working, and do you think that people are starting to respond to the realisation that the First Minister is serious when she says that there will be a referendum in the first half of this parliamentary term?
Yeah, I do. I joined the Scottish National Party in 1976 when I was a very young boy. And my raison d'etre was the same as SNP. I believe my nation should be an independent, sovereign nation. And then I had my career and I came back to politics, and I was working within the SNP on a voluntary basis, doing campaigns and helping people out. It was a 2014 campaign that bit me and brought me in, and I ran Yes Inverclyde from 2012 right through till 19th of September 2014. And it was a huge learning curve for me and a great privilege to do it. And I spent my time and my effort and my money to run that campaign and brought in lots of great people around me until the day when we missed out in Inverclyde by 86 votes. And it was incredibly painful. And I made the vow then that we would come back and we would do this again. We're not going to just take this and walk away from it, because we'd grown so much during the campaign. From an area which was between 23 and 26% yes, we got to 49.99. I'm never going to walk away from that. You know, I was asked before 2014, if you lose, what will you do? And I said, well, we'll start again the 19th. It's as simple as that. We didn't, because I spent 5 days feeling very sorry for myself and very sorry for my nation before I gave myself a kick in the backside and said, you know, you've got to go back on this horse and go again. Ultimately, it led to me getting elected to Westminster in the following May, then 2017, then 2019. The people of Inverclyde are still talking to me. They're still electing SNP people, and we stand on a manifesto which says our nation will be an independent country. We will give you that choice. Nothing has changed there. No other political party will change my view on that. And what we have to do now is understand that when that opportunity comes along, we have to stop the politicking. We have to pull together. We have to reassess what the Yes movement is all about and stop kicking each other, because plenty of other people will do that for us if we let them. As the SNP will lead this campaign because of our results at the ballot box. And I think the council elections will show us that as well. The people of Scotland demand the right. Now, I understand the frustrations amongst many people who say, oh, we should have done it before now. If we did a referendum in 2015 or 16 or 17 or 18, we'd have lost. We lose this next referendum, it's not going back probably in my lifetime. And I'm not about to throw that opportunity away, maybe not for me, but for my children and my grandchildren. We need to get it right next time. And I believe that having a patient approach to this and making sure that it's done in the proper manner at the right time, and trying to guarantee within the law, guarantee that we can win this is hugely important. I don't want to rush into a referendum. Let's do it next week because we're high in the polls and we lose it. Because that's it done. That's it over. And we owe it. Right now, we are the custodians, we're the guardians of this movement. And that we should have to be very careful what we wish for. When this referendum comes along, and yes, we'll put a time constraint on it now, quite rightly, we're just going to win it. And the people of Scotland have to understand that's why we've delayed it. We've waited to get ourselves into a position when Brexit has to have done us good. Yeah, it has to have done us good. And that's been smudged by the UK government. A lot of stuff which is Brexit related is getting blamed on COVID. You know, we did not ask for Brexit. We put it in our manifesto that said if there's a major change to Scotland's situation, like being pulled out of the EU against our will, that's in our manifesto, then we will have a second independence referendum campaign. And we put that in front of the people of Scotland, and they voted SNP en masse. I think on the council election, they will still understand that yes, it's about local policies, yes, it's happening in your community, but the overarching message between this, overriding message there is that the Scottish National Party is the political party which will lead our country to independence. And everybody else, once they got on board with us and help us and push in the right direction and do it in a positive, constructive, collegiate manner, then come on board and we'll make it happen.
Thanks, Ronnie. That's a stirring response. I'm very grateful to you this evening. Now, I can see that there's a story that we've already spoken about is continuing to develop this evening. And so as I'm lucky enough to have you here, I'll ask you about it. Anushka Asthana, who is the Deputy Political Editor of ITV News, is reporting that she hears that police fines are landing into people's inboxes relating to the Garden event on the 20th of May 2020, also known as the BYOB event, one that Boris Johnson did definitely go to, albeit the Metropolitan Police say that they won't update anybody until the end of the election, and they're citing the PURDA rules, which manage the disclosure of information in the time immediately before an election. Now, in response, your colleague, the SNP's Deputy Westminster leader, Kirsten Oswald MP, has said, the scale of law-breaking in Downing Street is staggering. There is a clear pattern that while the public made difficult sacrifices and followed the rules, the Tories partied away without a care. With reports that further fines are being issued by the Met Police relating to boozy lockdown parties, Boris Johnson must come clean over whether or not he has also been issued with yet another fine. There's no doubt that Boris Johnson is a serial liar who has misled Parliament, deceived voters and woefully broken the law. Tory MPs must finally accept their responsibility to restore public trust by removing the Prime Minister from office. Now, if it's correct that further fines are now beginning to land in people's mailboxes and email boxes, and it's being pointed out already this week that if the numbers are true, the building in the whole of the United Kingdom where the greatest number of fixed penalty notices for breaking COVID regulations, the building with the single highest number of fixed penalty notices is number 10, Downing Street. Another news organisation suggests that there was a university where 28 fixed penalty notices were handed out in one building, but Downing Street apparently has significantly beaten that high number, and it's suggested, it's been reported this evening that yet more fixed penalty notices are appearing. Do you think that there's an argument that will play with voters, be it Conservative voters or others, that the extent of the law breaking, the repetition of the law breaking, that litany of law breaking, will it have in the context of other crimes, in the context of speeding offences, for example, will this repetition of the law breaking, will it have a totting up effect? Will it be the case that with the repeated breaking of the law, eventually you will find that Boris Johnson has his licence taken away from being Prime Minister?
I think it's a very interesting story. It doesn't come as any great surprise to me. We all knew there'd been a range of parties, a whole number, 13, 14, whatever, the number changes. And we all knew that the Prime Minister had been at a number of them. So he's caught out on one. This sort of goes back to what I said earlier. His apology is not for what he did. He's sorry because he was caught. And I watched him on Tuesday, and I think most of us knew he'd been at other parties, and if the Met Police did their job as they appeared to be doing, he would receive fines. Now, at this point in time, he hasn't, but I'd be very surprised if looking at all the other events he was at, that he's not subject to at least one other fine. He had an opportunity on Tuesday to acknowledge that. He could have stood there on Tuesday and said, okay, I've been given this one fine, I apologise profusely, I got it all wrong, I throw yourself at my mercy, and I wish for these other convictions to be taken into consideration, my lad. He didn't, because he's arrogant and he's entitled. and he will get away with it for as long as he thinks he can get away with it. On Tuesday, after his half-hearted apology, there was a meeting of the Conservative Backbench Committee, the 1922 committee, and Boris Johnson went into that meeting having been contrite in Parliament, and he was laughing and joking about his behaviour. And a number of Conservative backbenchers walked out of that meeting within 3 or 4 minutes of it starting. And that's because they know what's happening. And there will be more fines for more people. And he had an opportunity to be upfront about this and maybe preserve some sort of dignity or standing or stature, but he didn't. And he didn't because he's been getting away with it all his life, and he will continue to try and muddle and bumble his way through this for as long as his colleagues allow him to. And this is very important, because the people who are now still keeping Boris Johnson in position know the situation, and it's reflecting badly in them as well. And every single member of the Conservative and Unionist parties, elected, non-elected, council candidates standing in this upcoming election should be asked the question, do you still support Boris Johnson now that you know everything, now that the Met Police have started handing out fines? And yeah, they won't give it out anymore until after the council election because of murder. I'm not concerned by murder, so I can say what I like. The man has lied, and he will lie again. So do you, as a Conservative council candidate, still back Boris Johnson? Every single one of them should be asked that question. And every single one that says yes has got no right to be trusted by the electorate of Scotland.
Thanks, Ronnie. Strong words in a strong situation that I think requires a robust response to those who seek elected office across Scotland on the 5th of May. However, that was our final item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support this, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. We really do need all of the financial assistance that we can get in order to continue what we are doing and to do more of what we are doing. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, Hugh will be here on Sunday with the next edition of the Full Scottish, so please tune in and join Hugh and his guest at 12 noon on Sunday. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has been watching us this evening, and I would like to repeat my special thanks to our guest this evening, Ronnie Cowan MP. Thanks, Ronnie.
Thank you.
So that's the way it is at a little bit after Scotland at 8. I hope that you can join us again on Broadcasting Scotland, but in the meantime, please keep warm and keep well. Bye-bye.